Did you know that right now, more than 1 in 3 Americans couldn't handle a $400 emergency without going into debt? No, not during the 2008 crash, not during the pandemic. Today, after the supposed recovery, the stock market is hitting new highs. Our GDP growth is beating Europe. Unemployment is at historic lows. By every official measure, America's economy looks strong. But if you're actually living in it, something feels fundamentally broken. This isn't a story about a dramatic collapse. Those are visible and temporary. This is about something much more insidious. It's about what happens when a crisis stops being an emergency and just becomes the new normal. When the extraordinary becomes ordinary, and an entire nation learns to operate inside permanent dysfunction. This is the story of how our temporary problems became a way of life. The headlines tell one story. Reality whispers another. In 2024, the IMF called the United States the strongest major economy in the world. Consumer spending was resilient. AI investment surged. Fiscal stimulus cushioned every shock, but buried in those same glowing reports were warnings that rarely made the front page. Household vulnerability at dangerous levels, deepening housing shortages, and climbing debt burdens. Growth existed, but relief did not. For millions of Americans, good news on the TV stopped translating into better lives. Sure, paychecks rose, but costs rose faster. Job numbers improved, but job security evaporated. Health insurance existed, but healthcare became unaffordable. This is what happens when statistics improve, but the systems underneath them corrode. When the country gets richer, but its people feel poorer. This disconnect isn't in your head. It's measurable, and it's getting wider. By 2025, America had quietly fractured into 2 separate economies. The first, America owns assets, homes, stocks, retirement accounts. When prices rise, this America prospers. Inflation actually becomes wealth. Their homes appreciate, their portfolios grow. The second, America owns obligations, rent, credit cards, student loans, medical bills. For them, when prices rise, they suffocate. Inflation is a punishment. Their rent spikes, their debt grows, their security evaporates. According to a 2024 OECD survey, wealth gains are increasingly concentrated among those who already hold assets. This divide isn't just financial. It determines stress levels, family stability, health outcomes. It shapes who sleeps well at night and who lies awake doing math. To America's one nation. Completely different worlds. Think about it. Every major crisis of the past 2 decades was sold to us as temporary. The 2008 housing crash, extraordinary circumstances, student debt, a manageable issue. But none of these problems were truly resolved. Instead, each crisis just reshaped what we considered normal. According to the Congressional Budget Office, things like elevated debt, high interest rates, and housing shortages are now expected to persist, not for years, but for decades. These aren't glitches anymore. They are features of the system. America didn't fail to recover from its crises. It succeeded at something much more troubling. It learned how to live inside the dysfunction without ever fixing it. If you want to understand how this happened, just look at housing. Freddie Mac estimates a shortage of nearly 4 million homes. Construction lags, zoning laws block new building, and mortgage rates are stubbornly high. At the exact moment families need homes, big investors are swooping in and buying them up. For working families, this created an impossible equation. Housing stopped being about shelter first and became an investment asset first. When that happens, human stability becomes optional. Debt used to be about funding, opportunity, a small business, a home. Today, debt funds survival. The New York Fed's 2025 data shows credit card balances at record levels. People aren't just using Buy No Pay Later for fun stuff. They're using it for groceries, utilities, and medicine. This isn't about reckless spending. It's simple math. When your wages don't keep up with costs, debt fills the gap. And when debt fills that gap for long enough, it stops being a tool and becomes a trap. Yes, wages did rise after the pandemic. But once you adjust for inflation, that growth flattened out almost immediately. Meanwhile, productivity gains, which should benefit workers, flowed straight to the top. Record executive bonuses, huge shareholder returns. Workers absorbed all the risk. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. The problem is, it was designed for someone else. And this economic stress doesn't just stay on a spreadsheet. The CDC links financial insecurity directly to rising rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout. People don't just feel stressed, they feel cornered. They feel trapped in a system where playing by the rules no longer guarantees you can win, or even just stay afloat. A society can endure hardship if people believe it's temporary. But it starts to fracture when people feel like their effort no longer matters. When you do everything right and still fall behind, that isn't just economic pressure. That feels like a betrayal. Markets reward optimism. Politicians sell optimism. Media broadcasts optimism. But households feel something entirely different. According to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, throughout 2024 and 2025, Americans consistently rated their personal financial outlook significantly worse than national economic conditions. This gap between what the data says and what people feel was both unusual and persistent. People trust their own experience more than official narratives. And their experience tells them something the headlines won't. The numbers don't add up. The story doesn't make sense. They see record profits announced the same week their hours get cut. They hear about economic growth while their rent increases again. They read about falling unemployment while qualified candidates send hundreds of applications into the void. This isn't ignorance. It's pattern recognition. Why hasn't policy fixed any of this? Because today's problems aren't cyclical disruptions that stimulus can smooth over. They're structural fractures that require fundamental redesign. Housing shortages take years of sustained construction and zoning reform. Debt systems entrench dependence by design. Asset inflation directly benefits politically powerful groups, and election cycles discourage any solution that takes longer than 2 years to show results. Temporary fixes stabilize markets. They calm investors. They produce headlines, but they don't rebuild lives. Real solutions require confronting entrenched interests, redistributing power, and accepting short-term political pain for long-term societal gain. And in modern America, that's become almost impossible. Artificial intelligence, investment-fueled, substantial economic growth in 2024 and 2025. Tech companies poured hundreds of billions into AI infrastructure. Productivity gains emerged in specific sectors. GDP calculations reflected the surge. But both the IMF and OECD issued the same warning. Productivity gains from AI may deepen inequality rather than reduce it. Job displacement could outpace retraining efforts by years. Benefits will concentrate overwhelmingly among firms that already possess capital. AI may grow GDP. It may boost corporate profits. It may revolutionize industries. But GDP no longer guarantees security. Corporate profits no longer trickle down. Industrial revolutions no longer lift all boats. For working Americans, AI isn't necessarily a solution. It might be an accelerator of the very crisis they're already living through. For decades, Americans believed in a simple, linear narrative of progress. Work hard, save money, buy a home, raise a family, retire with dignity. Each generation would be better off than the last. According to Pew Research's 2024 survey, fewer Americans now believe their children will be better off than they are. This represents a fundamental collapse in the national narrative. This isn't pessimism. It's not defeatism. It's pattern recognition. It's parents watching their educated children struggle with the same basic security they achieved with far less education. It's young adults watching homeownership drift further away each year despite doing everything right. The mythology of upward mobility hasn't just weakened. For tens of millions of Americans, it has died entirely. And when a society stops believing its children will have better lives, something essential breaks. This isn't a story about global American decline. The United States remains extraordinarily wealthy by any international measure. Its military dominates. Its technology leads. Its currency anchors the world. But internally, the stability that once defined American life has fractured beyond recognition. The nation produces staggering abundance and distributes profound insecurity. It generates immense wealth and delivers widespread anxiety. It broadcasts strength while its people quietly drown. This is the paradox. America hasn't declined, it has split, and the gap between its strength and its citizens' security grows wider every year. When crisis becomes normalized, politics transforms. Voters disengage, not from apathy, but from exhaustion. Polarization intensifies because economic stress needs a target. Trust in institutions collapses because institutions keep promising solutions that never arrive. Economic stress becomes political fuel, and politics becomes a battlefield of blame rather than a forum for solutions. Every problem becomes tribal. Every solution becomes impossible. The permanent crisis doesn't just hurt wallets. It poisons democracy itself. If nothing fundamentally changes, the Congressional Budget Office's 2025 projections paint a clear picture. Debt servicing will increasingly crowd out public investment. Housing affordability will worsen in nearly every major metro. Family formation will continue declining. Inequality will compound across generations, calcifying into something approaching a hereditary class system. This isn't apocalyptic collapse. There will be no dramatic breaking point, no single catastrophic failure. It's something more insidious, slow, steady erosion, a gradual hollowing out of the middle class, a quiet acceptance that stability is reserved for those already secure, a generational resignation to diminished expectations. The danger isn't a crash. The danger is drift. American culture teaches self-blame with remarkable efficiency. Can't afford rent? Budget better. Struggling with debt? Work harder. Can't buy a home? Save more, spend less, hustle smarter. But this crisis isn't individual, it's systemic. No personal budget can fix a housing shortage of 3.7 million homes. No side hustle can overcome wage stagnation across an entire economy. No amount of discipline can beat asset inflation when you don't own assets. This isn't personal failure. This is structural pressure, systematically applied across millions of households simultaneously. And framing it as individual failure is itself part of the system because it prevents collective action to change it. History demonstrates that societies don't fracture from poverty alone. They fracture from betrayed expectations. America didn't promise its citizens wealth. It promised them something more fundamental, that hard work would lead to security, that playing by the rules would lead to stability, that the next generation would have it better than the last. The country delivered volatility instead of stability, insecurity instead of safety, decline instead of progress. That gap between promise and reality is where nations break. Not dramatically, but gradually. Not in revolution, but in disillusionment. And America is living inside that gap right now. Can the system change? Yes, but only through difficult, politically costly reforms that have been postponed for decades. Housing reform that prioritizes shelter over investment returns. Wage productivity realignment that allows workers to share in the gains they create. Comprehensive debt restructuring that breaks cycles of permanent obligation. And long-term policy courage that accepts short-term political pain for generational benefit. None are easy. All require confronting powerful interests. Most will be called radical, even though they're simply a return to what once worked. But all are necessary, and all are possible. The question isn't whether America has the resources to fix this. It does. The question is whether it has the will. The real question facing America isn't technical. It's not about feasibility or resources or knowledge. It's about incentives. Permanent crisis is profitable for those positioned to exploit it. Landlords benefit from housing shortages. Creditors benefit from debt dependence. Asset holders benefit from inflation. And politicians benefit from voters too exhausted to demand systemic change. Stability disrupts these arrangements. It redistributes power. It threatens those who profit from dysfunction. So the question isn't whether America can fix this. America didn't arrive at permanent crisis overnight. It arrived through postponed solutions, through normalized stress. Through treating emergency as routine until routine became emergency. Temporary problems became permanent, not because they were unsolvable, but because ignoring them felt easier than confronting them. Because fixing them would require redistribution. Because those with power to change the system benefited from leaving it broken. The danger America faces isn't dramatic collapse. It's not revolution or invasion or sudden catastrophe. The danger is acceptance. The danger is a generation growing up believing this is simply how life works, that insecurity is normal, that struggle is inevitable, that the system isn't broken, this is just what the system is. And the future America's future depends entirely on what its people refuse to normalize next.